This is a thing that happens to me. It's okay if you can't relate or it doesn't happen to you, but I bet some of you can relate. Have you ever been hanging out with somebody and you're having a really nice time and maybe they got kids and they're playing in the background and you're laughing about stuff, shooting the breeze, whatever, have a cup of coffee, whatever socially normative adults do. But then in the background, you can see, the kids are getting off the rails a little bit. Like they're screwing around and making noise. And, I'm not annoyed by it, but I can kind of tell that the parent I'm talking to is. I wonder if they're going to say something. And then finally the parent's like, I'm sorry, hang on just 1 second. Hey, you two, knock it off. Do not hit your sister. No. You guys can share that, or you can have a giant cup full of nothing. Would that be better? Treat each other with respect. Do you need some time? All right. That's better. Treat each other well. I'm so sorry. What were we talking about? And in that moment, again, maybe you're different than me, but in that moment, I'm all socially nervous. Like, oh, wow, I just saw the tiger. Like, I don't get that version of you ever. I'm not usually around for the internal family discussions that admittedly need to happen from time to time. And you're the parent. You're supposed to correct the kids. It's great. I'm glad you're doing that. And your kids are wonderful. You're nailing it. But it almost felt like you were mad at me. And I'm so unaccustomed to this version of you that I just got to think about what just happened for a second before I can get back on track and go back to friendly adult niceties. Likewise, in the book of Matthew, there's so much stuff where it just feels like we're having this really nice time with Jesus. And he's saying nice things and he's telling nice stories and he's making meals for like thousands of people out of just whatever was in some kid's lunchbox. We're like, that was so neat. I absolutely loved it. It warmed my heart. This is a really nice time we're having, isn't it? But then every now and then we overhear some serious family business and it feels weird. It feels like I know you're talking internally with this family of faith that you are a part of and a conversation that's very important right there. But I'm still sitting here and this version of you makes me feel like you're mad at me and I'm uncomfortable and I don't really understand or see this version of you as much. And I think it is possible that that very human impulse we have in such a situation like that might adversely affect our ability to understand the basic words that Jesus is saying in parts of the Bible where he is heavily calling out the religious establishment of the day and where he is calling out something that is wrong in that moment, but that also might have implications that go beyond that moment. I think we've run into a lot of that, especially in the latter half of the book of Matthew. And I think that natural discomfort that we feel as people way after the fact reading about some of these particular issues that Jesus was calling out in the religious culture of the day, I think it's an intended discomfort. And I think we are supposed to think about that discomfort first in its original context, but also every single passage in the entire Bible is in there to be like, all right, well, here's who God is and here's how God responds in different situations. And then after you think about those things, I think the idea is that any reader is supposed to be like, where exactly do I fit into this? What exactly might that mean for me and what I do? All of that to say, in Matthew chapter 25, verse 32, we are about to run into a teaching of Jesus that is going to cause discomfort. It's discomfort that at its initial level is us as outsiders looking in on a family conversation that needs to happen. This is good parenting. This is healthy. This is right. But also that as outsiders might feel a little bit foreign to us. It is also a conversation that has implications that go beyond the initial context of the conversation. I think that becomes evident the closer we look at it. And so I think we just got to keep all of that in mind as we spend the next few days working on this bit here at the end of Matthew chapter 25, as Jesus is landing the plane on this flow of thought that really started when Jesus got into Jerusalem and was greeted by the masses and not so greeted by the religious leadership and establishment. The religious leaders could tell, this guy's not here to prop up our stuff. It's very evident that what he is doing represents a sea change. His existence is a walking, living critique of everything about what we're doing. And that, at least initially, was really appealing to the normal, everyday Joe on the street. But what we're going to find eventually is that the power of the institution, the power of the thought control mechanisms that the religious leaders and political leaders owned, it was just too much for the the normal person to overcome in such a short span of time. And gradually that enthusiasm for Jesus upon his triumphal entry in chapter 21 is going to wane all the way to him getting nailed to a cross and murdered on it. By the time we get into chapters 24 and 25, it feels like the ship has sailed. In chapter 23, Jesus pronounces those 7 woes against the religious leadership, which, again, it feels like we're listening in on a family conversation that makes us real uncomfortable, but there it all is. Then in chapters 24 and 25, what we've been working on for an age here, Jesus pivots to just talking to the people who are going to be with him, to the disciples, to the ones who are looking forward to the end of things. They're like, all right, we can read the writing on the wall. This is headed in a rough direction. It's clearly heading for a break. Apparently, as Jesus described it to him, it's headed for a violent break. They want to know, what does it mean? What's the timeline here? Where do we fit? What do we do? What should we be looking for? And Jesus gives them a multi-part answer starting in chapter 24. The answer is a whole bunch of stuff is just going to happen. That's just the world doing things that the world is going to do. Just stay the course. After that, there's going to be some kind of culminating incident where there is a profaning of something holy. That's predicted by the prophets in the Old Testament, particularly Daniel. Things might get weird at that point if you're in close proximity to it. Just do the things that make sense, and that might involve a tiny bit of self-preservation or maybe even helping other people out in the process of that chaos. When things get crazy there are going to be all kinds of people who are like, oh, the Son of Man is back. He's over here. He's over there. Don't listen to that. You will know when the Son of Man returns. And at the end of chapter 24, he's like, you'll know because it's going to look like this. And nobody knows the day or the hour. That's up to God to know. And so society's going to keep rolling along with people, doing like they did back in the days of Noah, eating and drinking and getting married and doing all that normal business. And then just boom, it's going to happen. And then after that, from the end of chapter 24 all the way into 25, where we've been lately, you get a series of parables that characterize what the right response of the kingdom citizen looks like in this expectant age, anticipating the return of the Son of Man, but not knowing exactly when that is going to happen. At the end of chapter 25, Jesus pivots all the way back to the in-house conversation with the religious leadership. Even though they're not in the room, Jesus is now rounding out the thought, saying, like, here's what's going to happen to the whole religious establishment that is symbolized by the temple and the temple system. He's indicating that that temple is coming down, and so is the system that goes along with it. There's a new and better thing coming here with the Son of Man, with what Jesus is about. And this old thing is going to be taken apart, and it's going to hurt, and it's going to be evident. And so in light of that, if we think of chapter 23, 24, and 25 as one block of thought, it all kind of works. Block 1, judgment against the Pharisees right to their faces. Block 2, talking with the disciples about where things are going to go and what it looks like for them to live and think and orient properly given the way time and the kingdom are going to unfold. And then the final block of thought is what we're getting started with right here, with something I still haven't read to you, but I'm going to before we're done today, which gets us back to explaining to the disciples, no, there is a judgment coming. There is going to be a reckoning. There is an end game to history. To use an analogy from earlier that we've talked about, it might look like this is all untended, but this field is tended. It might look like the master has left on a long trip and is never coming back, and things are just going to go to ruin, but that is not true. The master is coming back. The master is attentive to his affairs, and all of this stuff is going to be sorted out. And as Jesus describes that in the final chunk of Matthew 25, it feels like we're sitting with a parent who justifiably needs to interject into our conversation some serious correction of their kids with a certain tone. And even though that conversation might be between the parent and the kids with that certain tone, you and I sitting there listening can't help but learn something about the values of the person who's correcting their kids within earshot of us, and learn some things about what might make sense and be desirable for us moving forward with that relationship with the parent who's rightly correcting them. Here's the passage I'm talking about. This is the most backwards way we've ever done it, but I wanted to set it up the right way. Here's the first part of this passage that we're going to be talking about for a little while. Matthew 25, starting in verse 31, Jesus is talking here. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he'll sit on his throne in heavenly glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he'll separate the people from one another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He'll put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. And then he goes on to flesh out all of those ideas, and we'll look closely at that as we go along. But there it is. It sounds like we're listening in on a pretty weighty conversation that involves a reckoning, a sorting out, some discipline that has been maybe long overdue. And it sounds like some of that discipline, that correction, that reckoning is happening right now, but it also sounds like a whole lot of that reckoning is going to happen later. And as always, if you and I want to understand these texts that we're looking at, it takes a little bit of positioning to orient ourselves the right way to hear it as it was being said. And that's what our conversation today was about. This is speaking to an ongoing in-house issue with the religious leadership and how that's all going to play out. But there are also implications that go way beyond that for people who are external to that particular issue that is getting sorted out. And now hopefully you and I are positioned to work that through on both fronts that much better. I really like hanging out with all of you every day. Thanks for doing this with me. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.